This is our last class on the subject of controversy that Christians are unavoidably going to be involved in. We have approached this subject, if we just do a quick review, under the heading of the methods that you will use to carry out your evangelism, discipleship, and church planting. It's an issue, a very practical issue that is raised when you begin to work in cooperation with other people, or you begin to work with other people, and you begin to realize that they do things and they believe things that are quite different from you. By the very nature of this subject, we haven't been able to, bring it right down to the bottom line where we can give you a formula to follow by which you should know in every case. This is where the leading of the Holy Spirit is necessary. I believe that every Christian should have the ability to be long-suffering and patient, and there's another word I'm looking for. We should be tolerant enough with other people that we don't always have such a super critical attitude that we can't get along with anybody. I think that's really damaging as well. I don't believe that that's consistent with a loving attitude towards all Christians that we ought to have. But then, as we have mentioned, there needs to be a line drawn when you're talking about working together in ministry. It's one thing to fellowship with a person that you don't agree with theologically. I can fellowship on a personal level with just about anybody. I can be friendly to them. I can sit down and have a coffee with them. You should. But I would certainly draw the line with working with people that I would consider to be heretics or who are inconsistent. I would feel responsible to confront a person in a tactful and kind way if I felt that as a believer they were being inconsistent themselves or hypocritical, or that they were following a worldly philosophy of ministry or something of that nature. And it would be very possible to work out a working relationship with a person like that if they were willing to get rid of their controversial habits or ideas or whatever. Right? And this is where love and prayer and personal fellowship is very important when you're working with other missionaries. It doesn't matter what mission you ever join or what group of people on the mission field or on the home church level that you work with, you're always going to run into controversy. And there's one last subdivision of this study about being controversial, or knowing where to draw the line and where to become controversial, that we need to talk about, and that is differences of opinion. Simple differences of opinion. We're talking about differences of opinion on anything, whether you're talking about theology or the way to do something in the church, right? A policy that someone would like to implement that comes up for discussion, and people are going to have differences of opinion. What are some scriptural guidelines or things to remember regarding differences of opinion? First, we should recognize that there are going to be differences of opinion, and it's unrealistic to expect that there won't be. You will always find differences of opinion. We all have our own minds. God has blessed us with the capacity to think for ourselves. True Christianity does not require absolute uniformity. That's almost worth quoting. True Christianity does not require absolute uniformity of thought. On all subjects. True Christianity does not require absolute uniformity of thought on all subjects. True Christianity does require uniformity of thought on the basics. What would you consider the basics? You know, this is what the Apostle John was stressing in the epistles at the end of the New Testament. According to John, he said, fellowship around the person of Christ and the blood of Christ is essential. If we were going to make a list from the epistles of John, fellowship is based upon our relationship to Christ. Christ's blood and his cleansing. And a person that is walking contrary or outside of the realm of Christ's blood and Christ's cleansing, whether it be a believer or a non-believer, you can't have fellowship with a person like that. Okay, that's an absolute essential. Blood and cleansing. That's 1 John chapter 1. I think another absolute essential that John gives to us is indicated in chapter 2, verse 22. Who is a liar but he that denies that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist that denieth the Father and the Son. Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father. And so another essential is the deity of Christ. If you don't accept that, then you're simply outside the realm of Christian fellowship. Great. Another essential would be 1 John. Another essential would be 1 John chapter 3, that true Christians are truly converted. True Christians have a converted lifestyle. They don't characteristically sin. You don't see this written in most statements of faith, do you? You don't characteristically sin. In other words, your lifestyle wasn't a sinful lifestyle. You know, John says, whosoever committeth sin and transgresses the law, you know that he was manifested to take away our sins. If you abide in him, you don't sin. Whosoever is born of God does not commit sin. It's an absolute. Right? That does not mean we're perfect. Right? And again, this is a little bit difficult to interpret, but I believe that Christians have a hypostatic nature, union of natures, just as Christ was a hypostatic person. And I believe that this is what John is teaching us here, that we have a human nature, right? And then we also have the seed of God planted in us. And whatsoever is born of God does not sin. So if you're a Christian, you have a nature that does not produce sin. That's the divine nature that's planted within you. And that's the point of 1 John chapter 3. Right? Of course, that is part and parcel of our character. This may cause us to sin, but God's seed doesn't sin. Right? Right.
All these references.
Yes. Yes. 1 John 3:9 would be a reference. Okay. Another fundamental, according to John, is sticking with apostolic doctrine. 1 John chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. They are of the world, therefore speak they of the world hears them, referring to false prophets. We are of God, he that knows God hears us. That is the apostles. He that is not of God does not hear us. Right? And so another basic fundamental is that true Christians accept, listen to, and follow apostolic doctrine. We don't follow anything else. 1 John 4, 5, and 6. Apostolic, true Christians accept, listen to, and follow apostolic doctrine. That should be fundamental.
Okay, here's an thinking method overlapping on the truth.
Well, as opposed to professed or false Christians. You know, like there are lots of kinds of Christians out there, but if we're talking about the kind of Christian that the Bible talks about, the kind of Christian that is desirable when we're discipling, these are fundamentals, right? And these are examples of things that I don't believe that there should be any difference of opinion on. Right? First two statements that we started this class with were, true Christianity does not require absolute uniformity of thought on all subjects by every Christian. You know, in other words, I shouldn't expect Tracy to believe exactly like me in everything in life. Right? Nor should she expect me. And if we begin to become so narrow-minded that we expect everybody to think this exact same, well, that's bigotry. That's unrealistic. Right? The second statement is that true Christianity does require absolute uniformity on the basics. Well, what are the basics? Well, you can go to 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John and describe what the basics are. You know, Jude talks about the common salvation through Christ, you know, that we should strive for. So there's a common salvation with Christ at the center that requires faith. Right? That's another basic. Jude 3 and 4. And these are things about what there should absolute uniformity of thought on true Christians. If a person deviates on that, they're deviating from the biblical mold of what a Christian really should be, what a Christian should believe. Right? Now, we're not talking about that when we're talking about differences of opinion. Okay? We're talking about all the other things. For example, Romans chapter 14. I'll give you some references that deal with, that relate specifically to differences of opinion. Romans chapter 14, 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and 10. I suppose we could use an example from the book of Acts. Let's see, where is that where Paul and Barnabas had a great difference of opinion? That's in Acts chapter 15, verse 36 to 41. Acts 15, 36 to 41 is an example where two Christian leaders had a very, very strong difference of opinion. I can give you another example from 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Verse 12. The Apostle Paul wanted Apollos, who was a very eloquent teacher, to come to Corinth, and Apollos just didn't want to do it. He had a different opinion. had no interest in coming at this particular time. Right? No, those are, should I go or should I not go? Should we take this guy or should we not take this guy on the trip? 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and 10 and 14 have to do with, should you eat this or should you not eat this? We're talking about matters that, as far as Paul is concerned in the New Testament, in his teaching, that are matters of personal opinion. Okay? It's not that differences of opinion don't matter, because what you feel about a subject, and which you have a right to feel about a subject that differs from me, you will act upon your opinion. You know, and so your actions are always usually based upon your own opinions. We're not saying that differences of opinion are unimportant, but we need to just talk about some principles that govern how we act upon our differences of opinion and what should govern our personal opinions, like how we should view our own opinions. Okay? Let me just give you 4 logical statements that have to do with opinions. Differences of opinions come from 4 basic sources. Logically, a person is either completely wrong or B, the person is completely right, or C, the person is partly right and partly wrong at the same time, or an opinion, fourthly, can be partially correct, but incomplete. Those are the only alternatives, aren't there? Everybody's opinion on any subject falls into one of those categories if you're going to categorize opinions. Logically speaking, you're either totally dead right or you're dead wrong, or you're partly right and wrong, or you're partially correct, but you just haven't gone far enough. Right? Logically, that's about as far as you can go. And, we've already, we've assumed by our previous discussion that, part A there, where it says if a person's opinion is completely wrong, well, okay. Then what do you do for a person like that? What do you do? How do you relate to a person whose opinion is absolutely unscriptural? Pardon? Okay, you probably shouldn't work with them if you're talking about something important. Now people, we're talking about fundamentals. If a person is wrong on the fundamentals, the Bible says in places like 2 Timothy chapter 4 to withdraw yourself from such people. Ephesians chapter 5, expose error. Right? If a person is completely right, on the other hand, what is to be your response to that person? If it's another spiritual leader, sure. Why not? Sure. Be open-minded. Be cooperative. Be helpful. Right? Hebrews chapter 13, verses 7 and 9, where Christians are admonished to follow the faith of their leaders. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7 and 9 and 17. We're challenged to be cooperative. Most of the time you're going to run into a situation where where somebody's opinion is partially correct and partially incorrect. So what do you do? You know, how do you relate to a person that you believe it falls into this category? And probably you do too.
You have to look at the circumstances of what they believe and how vital it is. If you decide if it's wrong, you're not going to work with them. And also, you're going to talk to them and see if you can trust.
If a person is partially wrong, is it, like you're saying, is it a serious wrong? Is it a serious error? Is it a serious mistake? Are they wrong on a fundamental, or is it something else? Open communication is very important. And always speak directly to a person. I don't know anybody that's ever been in any kind of leadership position knows that it's quite normal for people it's quite normal for people to avoid an authority when they know they're wrong, or they think that you're not going to approve of them. You know, my kids won't come to me, they'll go to my wife. Or students will avoid me and they'll go talk to their peers, or they'll go talk to somebody else about a problem. People in the church, instead of going to a person in authority, will very often act in an insubordinate way and seek sympathy from other people in the church, you know, rather than trying to actually solve or discuss in an intelligent, quiet, open way with someone that can do something about it. So you need to recognize this. This is a natural thing. All of us should seek to allow God greater mastery over our minds and our thoughts. There's a reference in 2 Corinthians. When you're talking with people, you should be willing to sit down and say, look at, this is really a battle of the minds here, a difference of opinion. Verse 5, our attitude ought to be casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having in a readiness to punish all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled, not merely looking on things on the outward appearance. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 4 and following. If necessary, when there's a difference of opinion, you may find it necessary to contend for the truth, especially if it's a truth it's a fundamental truth that's being opposed. Okay? Fight for it. Jude, verses 3 and 4. Earnestly contend for the faith. However, sometimes it's possible to be right and wrong at the same time in the way we respond to things. And I think it's more important for us to strive about things that are going to have practical ramifications. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. In that verse, Paul says, as touching things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. You know, everybody has an opinion. Everybody has a certain conviction. And knowledge will puff up, but love edifies. For example, right now in Sault Ste. Marie, and in the country, in fact, I was watching this on the news, everybody's up in arms about these cities and municipalities in the province of Ontario that are reacting against Bill 8 that the government has passed, and they're declaring themselves English-only communities officially. You know, it means nothing because the government isn't requiring cities and municipalities to make their employees be bilingual. The government isn't forcing it. But here's an example of the sort of attitude a lot of people have in the church and working with other people. That person doesn't think like me, I don't agree with them, and therefore, we become actually quite bigoted, and we're unwilling to demonstrate love towards that person in action. Love, by its very nature, is an active concept. One of the best things you can do, if you know that another person has a difference of opinion with you, and it's not a serious thing, it's just you don't think alike on the same subject, it's not one of the fundamentals, is to treat them in a loving way. Not condescendingly, but do something that demonstrates your own love to them, and that will foster love in return. And it will keep personal disagreements and stuff like that from festering into something that they ought not to be. Yeah. Best way is to get it out of the intellectual realm and get down and practice. In effect, what should I be? I should be loving towards everybody else that doesn't agree with me. Right? The Apostle Paul has given to us in Romans chapter 14 a very extensive discussion on how you react to other people, other Christians. This is in the context of Christian interrelationships in chapters 12 to 15 in the book of Romans. Chapter 12, he talks about the Christian's relationship to others with different gifts. He talks about the Christian's relationship at the end of chapter 12 to the outside world. In chapter 13, the Christian's responsibility to government. At the end of chapter 13, the Christian's responsibility to society in general. Chapter 14, the Christian's responsibility to other Christians with whom he differs. And that's the whole idea of Romans chapter 14. I recently restudied this because there's a difference of opinion among Christians in our area as to how individual Christians in the church should respond to their spiritual leaders. For example, one pastor in our area is requiring that if he teaches something from the pulpit, that Christians in the church should submit, even if they don't agree with it. They should submit to his teaching on that subject. And if they're not willing to submit, then he feels he would even counsel them that they're out of the will of God and subject to God's chastisement. And now is that a fundamental, or is that peripheral in a sense? It's kind of important, but it's not one of these fundamentals, I don't think.
It certainly can lead to a fundamental.
It can eventually, if you take it to its extreme, but as such, it's kind of a quirk of a particular leader. Right? A person could put up with it. You could live with it. You wouldn't necessarily have to agree with it. You understand? There's an example of a difference of opinion. I don't believe that at all. I believe that people that come to church should respect the authority of a spiritual leader in the church, and certainly should give him the benefit of the doubt when it comes to issues and guidance. But we are not popes. And unfortunately, many Protestant pastors, do consider themselves almost like Protestant popes. Their word is law, and it's a real shame. Well, this is an area that illustrates a real difference of opinion among Christians. How do you respond to this? One Christian thinks one way, another Christian thinks another way. The Apostle Paul gives us several guidelines in Romans chapter 14. First, he plainly says in the first verse of Romans chapter 14, let me just give you a list of principles that govern actions on differences of opinion. And this will help you in your ministry. I'm telling you, this is why we're discussing it in missions here. This is really practical. Number one, him that is weak in the faith, receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. Rule number one. On debatable things on which Christians differ, have different opinions, Don't make it an issue to be discussed with new Christians. Don't make them issues to be discussed in the presence of new Christians. You should welcome new Christians into the local church. The local church should be a place where new Christians who are sensitive to all kinds of things, right? Easily led, easily influenced, they don't have background knowledge. The local church ought to be like a nursery where you can bring them in and you'll nurture them and give them what they need rather than give them what they don't need. You know? It only makes sense. All plants need sun, but you don't give a baby plant too much sun. Okay? I think that's a really important thing. Sometimes you have the impression that the King James controversy, is the only issue to some people. And so to a new Christian, they'll make this a major thing, and the person has absolutely no background, no way to handle it, no way to peg information. It's just coming out of, and they get totally bewildered. Okay? Receive new Christians, or him that is weak in the faith, but not to doubtful disputations. All right, verse 3 is the second principle. Let not him that eats despise him that eats not. Let not him who eats not judge him that eats, for God has received him. The second principle is that if it's not a fundamental difference, don't be judgmental about it. If it's not a fundamental difference, don't be judgmental. How do you mean?
I know a lot of people that are making that fundamental, but they're not going to go into peripheral issues if you don't deal with them. You can't make that. That's not being judgmental. That's being judgmental, but it's not my authority. It's God's authority. That's not my judgment.
Yeah, there comes a point where in teaching people that you have to introduce them to issues. Everything in the Christian life is issue oriented in one relation or another. You understand? But and we're not teaching the avoidance of issues interminably. We're talking about the avoidance of issues at birth, sort of. Or for someone that's never really had a chance to grow or something. Like this is in the context of missions and discipleship. Evangelize someone, somebody gets saved. Maybe they've been saved. Maybe somebody led them to the Lord 10 years ago, and then they never had a contact with a Christian leader. The guy was passing through. He was never disciplized. Well, before you get into any basic issues, you ought to discuss fundamentals with this person. Get them grounded. And then you can begin to introduce them in a tactful way to some of these other peripheral issues. See? And this is something that new Christians need to realize. I think this is fundamental today. I think that the knowing that Christians do differ and kind of preparing a convert for problems in the churches is essential. You can't. How many Christians will go into a church setting? New Christians will go into a church setting thinking everything's going to be rosy. It's going to be no problems. Now I'm a Christian. I'm in fellowship with other Christians, and right away they get slapped in the face with a problem, and it destroys them because they weren't expecting it. Part of discipleship ought to be preparing people for the real life. It doesn't mean you have to get into too many particular examples with them. You understand? You don't hit them with all of this at once, but you do prepare them for reality. And part of it here, the second thing is the best thing you can do is talk about it without being judgmental. For example, tongue speaking is I would say it's a fundamental issue today. The charismatic movement, the problem, it has developed by the very size of it. and by the duration of it, the popularity of it, into a major issue. Okay? A few years ago, however, it might not have been. You could perhaps picture a situation where, if a person believes in speaking in tongues, maybe a person. Let me try to develop this way. Maybe a person believes that it's okay to speak in tongues, but the only time they would ever practice it would be in their closet. They would never make an issue in a local church setting. Okay? Well, I could put up with a person like that. There was a lady coming to our church for years. That was, and I encouraged her to come to our church. She was former Pentecostal, and she believed in speaking in tongues in her closet. And she told me she would never discuss it with anybody in the church. Fine, come right ahead. I can put up with that. I'm not going to be judgmental on you. Okay? This is what I'm talking about, an example of such a thing. I differ with her. I don't believe tongue speaking is even for today's closets. That's my own opinion. You have a pretty hard time edifying other believers when it's in your closet. Okay. So, principle number 2, don't be judgmental. We have people coming to our night class who are Pentecostals, right? Now, I can raise an issue without necessarily being judgmental. If you have to differ without being disagreeable. You know, it's always part of differences of opinion. Okay. Now, a third principle that governs differences of opinions and what we should do when we differ with another person is given to us in the last part of verse 5. One man esteems one day above another esteems every day the same. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. That's in the context of the next verse. He that regards the day regards it to the Lord. And the opposite is true as well. What is Paul saying here? If you've got an opinion, you better have an informed opinion. You ought to have a rationale supporting your opinion. Don't just be a mere follower of another view without having put any thought into it. Let every man be fully persuaded. Being persuaded means that you've thought it through, that you've looked at the evidence, and that you've come to a conclusion. See? And if every Christian would be an informed Christian on the issues, the more you know about something, the more likely, the better prepared you are to handle it properly. A little bit of knowledge, you've heard this, eh? A little bit of knowledge is dangerous. Right? So the better you are informed on a subject, the better. You know, I can sit down and have a wonderful discussion with Ron and Gwen in tongues, and I'm looking forward to the book of Acts when we get into it. You know, because I expect to be able to discuss it without getting angry and upset with them. Because I know full well what I believe, and I know the rationale behind it. And I think I know the rationale behind theirs. And so when we have a discussion, we can discuss it intelligently and in a self-controlled way. And every Christian is responsible. This is one of the things that should govern everybody's opinions. Right? I should not have an opinion on something just because Jack Hyles said it on a tape. That I know Jack Hyles holds to this particular view. Pro-King James Version. Well, whoopie-doo. You know? Like, you understand? Let every man be fully persuaded. That's a very important principle governing our interrelationships when we differ. All right. And then another point, another guideline.
So how would you burn that guideline? I didn't make any sense.
Well, make sure that your own personal opinions are based on being informed. Or another way to put it, being informed protects you. Let's quickly go on here so we don't miss out on the rest of them. In verses 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, actually 6 to 12, Paul makes one basic further point. I'll just read verse 9 and 12. For to this end Christ both died and rose and revived, that he might be Lord both of the dead and living. Verse 12, so then every one of us shall give account of himself to God. What do you think what point do you think Paul is making here? Yeah, that's right. I mean, what real difference does it make if we don't agree on some particular peripheral point? Someday the Lord is going to settle it. I'm going to answer to him, and so are you. So what are we squabbling about unnecessary things for down here? Yeah. If it's not a major issue, let's not fight over it. Okay, we can discuss it, and we can certainly teach on it. Right? There's nothing wrong with that, but let's not fight about it, and let's not judge, criticize other people for their personal opinions. Because every one of us is going to give an account of himself to the Lord, and someday the Lord's going to settle it. He's going to show that I'm right in every case. Not really. Now, there's one final principle that Paul discusses in the whole next half of the chapter in verses 13 to 23. And put a star beside this one and circle it 4 times and highlight it in yellow. This is the key point in the chapter. All these other things have to do with our attitudes. You don't have the attitude that you should force even a new Christian to accept your opinion. Let them grow a little bit before you hit them with that. Okay? And certainly don't be judgmental in your attitude towards a person that has a different opinion. If it's not a major thing, let them live with it. Big deal. Why should it bother you? Thirdly, make sure that your own opinion is an informed opinion. And fourthly, should recognize that your opinion you're going to answer for your opinion someday, just like the other person is going to answer for theirs. God is going to deal with you and me individually. Now, here is a major point. All the way through the rest of chapter 14, the Apostle Paul says this is the principle that will govern how you act. This is the most important one. When 2 Christians differ on something, think of always act according to the principle of end result. Act according to the principle of end result. I'll explain that. We have opinion A and opinion B. This is my opinion. This is the other guy's opinion. Now, Romans chapter 14, verses 13 to the end of the chapter, Paul is saying, in essence, there's only one principle that really matters. The main thing to remember is what will happen if I do this? If I do this, what will happen? What will be the end result? If I do something, that's going to cause something else to happen. It can cause several things to happen. What will the end result be? The principle of end result should be the determinative thing about whether or not I'm going to act upon my opinion. You understand that? Now, there are several ramifications. What will happen in 4 different areas? What will happen to my brother? What will result? Will my brother stumble?